Okay, self-improvement army. Today, we'll be learning how to redirect your dopamine flow to put you on the path to greatness and glory. We're going to be looking at some ideas that can help you better overcome those tough projects and assignments you may be procrastinating on and make them a lot easier to handle. Who is interested in improving their real-world productivity so they can become great?
Me, yes, General here.
Absolutely. Those Legionnaires who make it to the end get a special commendation for their concentration ability. Hit that like button and let's get started. Legionnaire Tiberius, tell the members of the self-improvement army how they can control their dopamine flow to make them become more successful in their lives.
Of course, General. Dopamine is one of the most powerful neurotransmitters in the human brain. Whether people are aware of it or not, dopamine plays a huge role in how motivated you are to do certain tasks. Dopamine is one of the key reasons people do what they do on a day-to-day basis, even if they are not aware of it. When I say dopamine, I want you to think the words motivation for reward. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter that calls you to action in anticipation of a reward. Today, dopamine can make you do many different things. Eating particular foods, buying particular products, and spending endless hours doing specific activities can be explained by dopamine in your brain. But to understand why this happens, we must look to the past. Dopamine was instrumental in helping humans to survive and reproduce. Dopamine helped humans survive by motivating them to figure out hard but rewarding puzzles and challenges they came across. For example, when a big juicy red apple was sitting far up on top of a tree, dopamine would be triggered in the brain so a person would be motivated to figure out how they could get the apple down and eat it. What branches could they climb up to get the apple? Could they use a stick to knock down the apple? By generating motivation and desire for a reward, dopamine was helping the human to figure out a puzzle to get the reward. When humans came across large groups of gazelles on the open plains, dopamine was triggered to motivate the humans to figure out how they could catch the gazelles. Dopamine motivated them to pursue the hunt, to work in teams and develop tools and weapons that could be used to capture the animals so they could be eaten for survival purposes. But dopamine wasn't only triggered by problem solving to get fruits and animals. Dopamine was also triggered to help in reproduction. Dopamine was triggered when a man came across an attractive new lady from a tribe. It motivated him to introduce himself in the hopes that she would like him, and one day they could eventually start a family. This neurotransmitter was key in motivating humans to reproduce. Dopamine puzzles and rewards linked to human survival and human reproduction go hand in hand. But the key thing to understand here is these dopamine generating activities, such as figuring out how to get a juicy fruit, or hunting the gazelle, or wooing the beautiful lady from the tribe, didn't happen all the time. In this tough age and environment thousands of years ago, these events could be days, weeks, or even months spaced apart. There were big time delays between when these events and activities took place. Dopamine wasn't triggered in high doses 24/7 in the ancient human brain because these highly stimulating activities didn't occur that frequently. Much of the time, ancient humans wandered around in an environment that was much less dopamine stimulating than it is today. Most of the time, it was just the sound of nature. The sound of a cackling fire, people talking to each other, and just the sound of silence altogether. But something strange and challenging has happened in the last century or so.
What's that, Tiberius?
The rise of technology and the never-ending thirst of a company's desire for profits. Dopamine-producing brain has been amazing in ancient times, but in the modern era, it has flown into the side of a window like a bird. Problems have sprung up now that the ancient brain hasn't been quick enough to overcome. And these challenges have led some people down the path of being very unproductive. You see, in the past, dopamine was aimed at making you productive in the real world. It helped you find real fruit, hunt real animals, construct real tools and real shelters, and find a real partner to have a real family. It was aimed at real survival and real reproduction. But in the modern era, this has all been hijacked. The ancient brain on an unconscious level hasn't been able to differentiate between real and artificial survival and reproduction tasks. Much of your dopamine can lead you down the path of chasing illusions and developing unhealthy and unproductive lifestyles that literally get you nowhere. You see, the big corporate businesses began to study dopamine to figure out how it could be used to make people buy more products and services. Having people buy more of their products will lead to higher profits and better stock prices. The big food CEO studied dopamine and found that humans love sugar as a reward. So over time, the food companies began to put sugar into nearly everything. Cereals, breads, drinks, and even salad dressings. This led to dopamine being released in the anticipation of eating many different foods with sugar in them as the reward. This led to more sales and higher profits for the food CEO. Video game CEOs studied dopamine and knew random rewards triggered huge amounts of dopamine to be released. So they began implementing random reward elements into their games to boost sales. Think about loot boxes. These companies would even hire psychologists to help them design the most addicting functions of their games to maximize the dopamine hits. Special bells and whistles would go off when a new item was found or unlocked. Gamers would feel strong dopamine releases trying to figure out puzzles or hunt down new rewards. And the more time the gamers spent playing the game or buying in-game rewards, the more profits the video game CEO made. You see, on a conscious level, the gamer knows he's playing a game that isn't real. But on an unconscious level, the ancient brain does not. The ancient brain sits there generating spikes of dopamine because it thinks these puzzles that are being solved are helping the human to productively survive in the real world, when that is not the case. This is not to say gaming is all bad, but as a member of the self-improvement army, you need to understand why it feels so good. It's because gaming is really just an artificial simulation for the ancient brain's survival mechanism. There is no problems with gaming in moderation. When it comes to big technology, the CEOs knew dopamine was triggered through novelty and random rewards, so they developed highly addicting mindless applications. These applications would have a person view a novelty video for 5 to 10 seconds before swiping onto the next one. This process acts as a never-ending loop and is intended to spike the ancient brain's dopamine with each swipe. Hotel CEOs knew dopamine was released by random rewards, so they developed gambling machines where you'd pull a lever, and if the correct combination of pictures showed up, sound effects would go off and lights would flash and a prize would be awarded. This anticipation for a random reward spikes the ancient brain with dopamine every time the lever is pulled on the machine. It's no coincidence that these machines operate very similar to the lever pulling machines used in rat dopamine studies. Website owners knew dopamine was strongly triggered in the ancient brain when different alluring pictures of females were shown on a screen. So more and more of these websites popped up showing more pictures and videos, hooking the ancient brain on a never-ending dopamine binge. In the past, seeing such an endless variety of scantily clad women would have never occurred. But what is really important to know is that if you spend too much time exposing yourself to high dopamine burning activities, you may start to feel a bit overwhelmed with stimulation. Your ancient brain was never designed to take on such an endless loop of high dopamine stimulating activities. And this is why these hard, mentally challenging tasks, such as sitting down for hours at a time to work through an assignment or develop a new productive skill, can be so difficult and seem so boring. It's because when you sit down to do this hard, mentally challenging work, the artificial bells and whistles and anticipation of pleasurable reward just isn't there anymore. Many people in society are hooked on endless dopamine-producing loops that end with an artificial, unproductive reward. This is why if you see someone glued to their smartphone or video game, on an underlying level, they are addicted to the dopamine reward loop that the smartphone or video game artificially produces. You see, on this ascent upwards, doing the hard, mentally tough work in your life is going to be required. And sometimes in life, if you don't go through the mentally focusing tasks, you may be selling yourself short. But the good news is, in the self-improvement army, tummy. There is nothing that we cannot overcome with our wisdom. Through strategy and planning, you can begin to redirect the flow of your dopamine-producing activities. This process can be implemented in 2 stages. The first stage is to perform a dopamine detox or dopamine fast. In this stage, you cut back on any impulsive behavior that spikes dopamine releases for at least 24 hours. You can go longer if you wish. In this phase, we intentionally avoid anything that stimulates the dopamine receptors in the brain to high levels. This process helps resensitize your dopamine receptors back to normal levels. And when I mean anything of pleasure, this includes no internet, no TV, no music, no video games, no smartphones, no reading, no checking emails, no sugary foods, no soft drinks, no coffee, and no alluring websites. You can only drink water. Food-wise, you can eat basic foods, or if you want, you can go without food at all. During this dopamine fast, you can meditate, you can exercise, you can write in a journal, and you can explore your own thoughts. This dopamine fast is expected to be very difficult. You will feel your brain craving for those old stimulating habits you're so used to. You will feel your brain kick and scream for those dopamine spikes again. You will feel a strong itch to check your smartphone or play video games, but persevere and see it through. The purpose of this phase is to reduce the dopamine stimulation, so eventually the lower dopamine stimulating tasks, such as doing homework and assignments or working on a productive project, become much more exciting and appealing. Once you've completed stage 1, you can go on to stage 2. Stage 2 is developing and implementing a productive strategy that will tie your dopamine releases to more productive outputs. Now, this stage is going to require some planning and strategy. You cannot control the nature of your brain. It will always be its ancient self, an inquisitive problem-solving machine that's always curious to explore new things and challenges, and it's always seeking rewards. But what you can do is choose what and how you feed these dopamine-producing activities to your brain and in what sequence. Think about the mentally hard and difficult tasks you've been putting off. These could include working on assignments, learning a productive new skill, or building and creating something of real value. After a dopamine detox in stage 1, your brain will now be much more inquisitive about these projects. It will now begin to look at these things in a different light. The best way to plan your day is to do these hard tasks and assignments first thing in the day when your willpower is at a maximum. Make sure when you do these tasks and projects to lock away any distractions such as smartphones. The other element of this strategy is to use your old high dopamine fixes as rewards and not as activities you do or items you just consume without work. For example, if you had a productive day building something of value, you can reward yourself with a high dopamine reward at the end of the day, like playing video games or watching your favorite TV show. Another part of phase 2 is to cut out the frequency of your high dopamine producing loops. For example, if you find yourself checking your smartphone hundreds of times a day, this is a sign of a frequent dopamine loop you're doing. What you can do is set pre-assigned times during the day to check your smartphone. Maybe 3 times a day only. Maybe once at 9 a.m. in the morning, once at midday, and then once at 6 p.m. in the evening. By reducing the frequency of this dopamine producing loop, it will reduce distractions and also make those tougher challenges a lot easier to overcome. If you choose, you also have the option to totally discard some of your old unproductive high dopamine habits and substitute them for something else. For example, if you feel video games are too addictive and unproductive, you can discard them and replace them with a side project with different goals. There's an endless variety of real productive projects you could get started in. Your brain will find the new project or task boring at first, but after time it will adapt. It will find it interesting. The key here is to maintain a low dopamine activity diet for your brain and not to give away any free rewards. And what I mean by free rewards is, if you want to be productive, don't wake up and eat sugary foods, and then play video games or take part in another high dopamine unproductive activity without doing the real hard productive work first. We will go through some real productive habits and changes you can put in place another time. But for now, understanding that dopamine is one of the main drivers of behavior of the ancient brain will give you the knowledge to become productive on the path to greatness. Maybe reflect on what dopamine loops you have going on in your life right now, and which ones would be great to cut out.
Thank you, Tiberius, for that presentation. Congratulations to those legionnaires who passed the test. Jupiter himself has now blessed you with extra strength. As a special reward, leave a comment that includes the code XV. I'm going to pick a legionnaire that includes that code, and they're going to feature in the next video. For now, let's toast to victory! To victory! To victory! To victory!